Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome, everyone, to another edition of Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with our podcast, we do a show each and every week which brings you the good, the bad, the ugly with all things real estate. We don't just talk about, whether home prices are going up and down. We talk about the economics behind things and give you a good foundation to understand what's actually taking place in the market, how, economic reports such as the unemployment rate, whether it's CPI or PPI, all those things, how they can affect interest rates, how they can affect home prices, home affordability. We're going to give you the skinny on all these things. And it's a show really to kind of try to break these bigger concepts down on a more elementary level so that, the everyday person can understand. I mean, a lot of what's pushed out there, is hard to understand. It's misconstrued most of the time. And we just really want to give you the real talk here. That's mainly what our show is all about, is about bringing you the information that can arm you to help you make educated decisions. We obviously ran this program as Real Estate 360 on CBS for over 2+ years. We've now launched onto iTunes. Just recently we were able to get that finally up and running on iTunes, so you can search us on iTunes at Real Estate 360. You can also go to the website at Real Estate 360 Live. Joining me, as he does every week, is Louis Camerasano, who has his own blog at smoggled.com. That's SMAULGLD.com. He's a former school teacher, a former attorney, and a former general manager of a major real estate portal. He's often cited in the media as a real estate industry expert. He's been cited in Forbes, Wall Street Journal, Fox Business, Smart Money, MSN, and numerous others. Louis, how are you doing today?
I'm doing grand, Ryan. How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, Louis. We've had a lot transpired over the last week.
We have.
So this is gonna be a fun show to kind of dive in, and I guess one of maybe the first places we can start is the census, taking the employment numbers back when the election took place back in 2008. The employment numbers mysteriously dropped down 0.3% from like 8.1 to 7.8, if I remember those numbers correctly. Does that sound about right to you?
That is correct.
Okay, so they dropped down about 0.3% mysteriously out of the blue and you and I did a show way back when, and it's not news to anybody that's been listening to this podcast that I felt all along that a lot of these reports have been manipulated, and there's just no way that this is actually what's going on. Very interesting because people actually do rely on these reports to be somewhat accurate. Wall Street, traders, they're the main ones, but that has a direct impact on where interest rates are going. And at that point in time, it probably had a pretty significant impact on the way people voted at that period of time.
Sure. Interest rate under 8% was a symbolic number. It looked like the president had started to do his job on getting the unemployment rate down.
But now, knowing that this has been going on then, and it was probably done even before then, how can anybody put any stock in any of these damn numbers that they throw out there? To me, they're meaningless at this point. I actually did a video the other day that, I send out daily videos on homes that are for sale in my local area, and I said, you know what, strip all these reports out. You need to really start making decisions just based upon yourself. You can't worry about really what's going on around you that much if you're watching the news and reading online articles and all that, because so much of it is just crap these days. I mean, the simple fact that if the census basically came out and I read a bunch of articles, and then they said that they have this very very stringent guidelines that they have to at least get a hold of 9 out of 10 households that are targeted and report back the job status of those. Well, those are random people that are selected there. And then it's 9 out of 10. And then we find out that the way these were done was that if they weren't able to get a hold of the people, that they could just mark it down as the same as it was before. So, I mean, to me, the numbers, the way that they even create these statistics is a joke. I don't put any stock in it. I believe that whatever the number is, I feel like, our real unemployment rate is double, if not pushing into the triple that range of real unemployment. And, as far as, would that have persuaded more people to not vote for Obama? I definitely think so, because, the things that people care most about is their livelihood, right? They care about the job market. They care about having this positive consumer sentiment out there that everybody's getting back to work. And that's exactly what transpired when that came out. It gave everybody, once again, that false sense of hope, right, Louis?
Yeah.
That's what we always talk about, is giving people the hope that, things are changing. The reality is, guys, nothing has changed. Things are getting worse, but we're given the appearance that they're getting better. And all we have to do is look right to the stock market, where they're climbing to astronomical numbers at this point. It's unbelievable where the Dow's at, and it's only a byproduct of the Federal Reserve.
Correct.
If this money was not lent out, if there was not this cheap money, this money that they're just printing out of thin air and giving to big banks and hedge funds to reinvest into the stock market, they're not lending it out to people. And we talk about this every single week. They're basically hoarding the money to reinvest and make these ridiculous returns. And you know what? It's not sustainable. Now, has it been going on for the last 5 years? Sure. But all good things come to an end.
If you can call this a good thing.
Well, you know what? It's a good thing.
Good for them.
For them, right? It's a good thing for the rich that are getting richer at this point. It's not a good thing for our overall economy. It's not a good thing for the U.S. dollar. And I really like it's very, to me it leaves a bitter taste in my mouth that to think that the BLS can just have these type of reports come out, and it has such a major impact on our overall country. It really is disturbing to me. You know what I mean? Just because Louis, you and I know how much these people put the stock into these reports, right? Wall Street.
Yep.
And now how much stock basically Wall Street puts into the Fed. They take what they say is the gospel, and that's the end of it. What are your thoughts on that whole issue? And what do you take away from these reports that come out from this point going forward?
Okay, so Ryan, I echo everything you said about the data itself being manipulated to try to come up with a number that is acceptable. But it's worse than that. It's actually 3 times worse than that, because you've got 3 factors. One, the data itself can be massaged and manipulated to get to a number that they want. The second is, then what does the Fed say about those numbers? And of course, they will read into numbers hopeful signs. They will say, looks like it's improving. And then, of course, when the Fed says something, that's what the market hangs their every word on. Their actions on every word of the Fed. So now you have a bogus report come out on employment. Then you have the Fed claim it looks like everything is going our way because of the wonderful job we're doing with QE. And then you get a third pile on to wrong data. You get AP and Reuters coming out and just throwing on an interpretation that makes absolutely no sense on top of the numbers. And the one that I always harp upon is how AP and Reuters, and of course then all the news goes to AP and Reuters down to the smaller news outlets, talks about how when there's lower initial jobless claims, somehow that means the employment situation is improving. When you and I have talked about it, it does not mean that the employment situation is improving. It only means fewer people got fired. It doesn't mean more people are getting hired. But yet, just came out yesterday, the headline in Reuters was, initial jobless claims lower, indication that the labor market is, quote, firming. Now, that doesn't mean that. It just means fewer people got fired, and that number is about 330,000 week in and week out. That's a lot of people. And the number of people that got hired is rarely over 200,000 in any given month. So you're losing 330,000 jobs a week, and they claim that somehow that means that the labor market's improving, and they don't point to the labor participation rate. which has been down and is now down to all-time all-time lows. So the labor market is not improving, but yet you start with the falsification of the labor statistic numbers that show something supposedly good. Then the Fed presidents come out and then they hang on it and they say, oh, you see, labor is improving. And then you get the media to do their bidding. And the other thing, this I find even more astonishing, is they can't leave it at that. It seems that Reuters is aware that if you don't believe the labor number, and if somehow the Fed needs ammunition to continue QE, because if labor is improving, now the Fed can say, see, we've done our job, maybe we can taper, they're going to start worrying about inflation. And from the Fed's point of view, if inflation is low, well, that's a disaster. We have to ward off deflation, so we better not taper. So you get caught in that state of seesaw that you and I talk about, where you're kind of trapped, where they may taper, they may not taper, and they can keep pushing off the taper because there's always some data that shows that maybe the economy is not as strong as we thought, unsuspected. It's inflation. It's not high enough yet. So what does Reuters do yesterday? They follow up their article by not only saying that the initial jobless claims look pretty good and indicate a firming market, they saw another article out there, which really why they would include these two together, other than to make the Fed's point. It says, quote, U.S. jobless claims fall, comma, hint at firming labor market. Fine. But then they follow up with it with labor market firming. This is another separate headline, labor market firming, comma, but inflation still benign. Well, the two have nothing to do with each other.
Right.
But what they're saying is, don't get all excited about that labor number, because if the Fed wants to say we need to continue QE because we haven't hit our inflation target, keep that in mind. So it really is an entire game designed to make you think what they want you to think. Not just that things are getting better, because they don't want you to think things are getting so much better, because then you'd ignore the Fed. They want you to be reliant on what the Fed's decision is as to whether they're going to do QE or not, what their monetary policy is going to be.
It's almost like one of the Fed chairs are actually sitting there at Reuters writing the articles for them, right? Just pumping out this stuff. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And it's like you said, the mainstream media here is just, it's unbelievable, the stuff that they're putting out there. But once again, this is exactly what people read on a daily basis, and it's a brainwashing that's taking place.
Oh, clearly.
And that's exactly what they want. They have to continue this madness. And, you know, the interesting thing is, Lewis, when I get into conversations with people about this, it becomes very controversial, because I'm taking, you know, obviously the contrarian view, even though to me it shouldn't be. It is, because so many people...
I view it as an objective view.
Well, that's what it is. But people, when I'm talking to them, all they're reading is what they see in Reuters and the Associated Press.
They will tell you the economy is recovering. They have used the word recovery. The economy is recovering. Recovery. We're in a recovery. The recovery this, the recovery that. We can't ruin the recovery. What recovery?
Yeah, I'm telling them that the only reason that the Fed continues to play this game back and forth is because they're basically trying to avoid an all-out depression. You know, I was reading an article on Forbes, I believe it was, about the latest Federal Reserve minutes that came out, and we'll discuss those in a minute. But there was a great comment that was down at the end of the article, and it was basically one of the quotes that at the end they chose to give themselves a little more time to see how the economy plays itself out going forward. Everybody knows how it's going to be playing itself out going forward. Nothing's changing. Employment's not getting better. But then he put the highfalutin translations of what that meant is, we are trapped between triggering a depression today
Correct.
or hyperinflation tomorrow.
As we have said, and I wrote in The King is Trapped, the Fed's no exit dilemma, that's been the case. And the more they extend QE, the more that is true.
Absolutely. And they don't have a choice, Lewis. You and I discuss this all the time. They don't have a choice. And the funny thing is, in the language of the Fed minutes, so the Fed minutes basically came out and said, this is from their October meeting, in which they decided to keep quantitative easing going in full force. They have no intentions of pulling it back right now, but they continue to say, well, it looks like the labor market is improving like we thought was going to happen, but we need to continue to see more data.
For the last 5 years.
Exactly, so that it's going to, make sure that what we're seeing this 1 month is a continuing trend. But they also came back out, as they always do, and basically said that, if it continues to do this, we're going to start to pull back our QE. Well, now they even made further language in there to where they need to be able to do this without upsetting the financial markets.
Right.
What do you mean upset the financial markets? What have you done? You've created an absolute asset bubble with stocks already. You already messed up the system.
And that's another reason not to do QE, because what they're doing is they're testing the market to see if they talk about it, what happens. And we see when they start talking taper, the 10-year note shoots up and they can't have that. Here's my concern, Ryan. The October minutes come out weeks after they've had their meeting and they've produced them. But what's really disingenuous is to have Janet Yellen up there talking about no problem, we're going to keep the stimulus going. You got Fed President Charlie Evans saying we're here to make sure that employment's on the right track, and it's not. So we're going to do the stimulus. Then you get Fed St. Louis President Bullard, who always claims he just needs more data, but taper's right around the corner. He then says, after the October meeting in early November, what's the hurry? Hey, inflation's low. We can keep the stimulus going. And then he says 2 days ago, taper's on the table in December. So first of all, what has changed? Nothing. They trot these guys out there to say two different things. You get Yellen and Evans and Bullard two weeks ago saying, no taper, we got to get the economy under control, no hurry, there's too much, there's not enough inflation, and everybody says, okay, so at least the taper's not going to happen until next year in March. Then all of a sudden you go, no, look at these October minutes, which were already, the meeting already happened when they were saying this, but now the meeting minutes look like they're going to taper right away. And then he tried out Dudley. He starts talking about he's hopeful. You got Locker. They start saying that all of a sudden they see stuff that's good.
Yeah.
And they're going to taper. What nonsense. They haven't seen anything. Everything is the same. They desperately want to end QE because they know they don't want to hold $4 trillion worth of garbage paper that they bought, even though they didn't pay anything for it.
Yeah.
They can't get rid of it.
And I think that it's so ironic that the minutes come out like almost a month later from the meeting. Why don't they come out the next day, right?
Sure, because they say two different things in between.
Absolutely.
No one calls them on that. If that was what they said at the meeting, why does the guy say after the meeting something that's contrary to what they said in the minutes, and then when the minute meetings come out, he backstops it and double backs and says, things are good. We're gonna taper maybe in December. When he said after the meeting, Bullard said no rush. Yellen testified no rush, but the minutes said there was a rush that they might do it. They might consider in December.
Yeah, and what's very interesting to me, and this why this is so important to you guys out there that are looking to buy a home is because this Fed minutes report moved the interest rate for the worse. Interest rates got much worse on this because once again they said the word taper. The word taper, for all of you out there that we keep saying the word taper, so I want to make sure for those of you listening in the first time that don't really understand what we're talking about. So the Fed is buying treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. Okay, they're buying about $85 billion a month, about 40 of treasuries and I think $45 billion of mortgage-backed securities. Now, when the Fed buys,
I think it's the other way around, isn't it?
Okay, so it might be 45 treasuries, 40 mortgage-backed securities. In any case, they're buying up about 80% of the mortgage-backed securities that are out there. Now, the Fed has said, by them doing that, they've suppressed interest rates. And that's why we've had interest rates so low for such an extended period of time is because the Fed is buying these mortgage-backed securities and long-term mortgage interest rates have stayed low. Now, when they say taper, they basically mean that they're going to pull back their purchases of these securities. Now, they haven't came out and said how much of treasuries they would pull back and how much of mortgage-backed securities. So what the markets do, what Wall Street does, is just assume that it's going to be across the board. It's going to be a little bit of both. Well, directly, when they do that, it's not even a doubt in my mind. The minute that they would do that for mortgage-backed securities, interest rates would absolutely skyrocket instantaneously. And that's
they talk about they absolutely skyrocket on a relative basis, given that they're starting at a low rate.
Absolutely. And, and if you look at a lot of the language that the Fed has used, they're trying to come up with a plan to not upset the markets. You can't. You can't. You're stuck.
Well, here's what the plan is, Ryan. And this is what Bernanke floated in June, and they're floating it again now. Don't worry. We're going to taper, but don't worry if we taper, because taper is not tightening. We're still going to have a loose, accommodative policy. We're still going to keep the Fed funds rate low, and those rates, trust us, will remain low until well into 2015. So don't worry about this taper stuff. Nonsense. Tapering, not, if they do taper, that is tightening. Because the only reason the rates are low, not because the Fed sets them and says they're low, is because bond investors know that the Fed will buy them, which keeps the demand up, which makes the interest rate low. So they can't say, we're going to stop QE, but rates will stay low, no problem. They even talk about stopping buying the bonds. Rates go up. So now they've done another trial balloon, Ryan. They've started talking about tapering, but keeping rates low, and rates jumped up to 2.80 on the 10-year note. And if they don't start talking about not doing it, they'll pass 3. And if you remember the reason, Ryan, in September they claimed they didn't taper, was they talked about tightening financial conditions, which meant interest rates had gone up to 3%, and Bernanke was scratching his head and says, there's no reason why they should have gone up that high. Well, yeah, because you started talking about tapering, and you're doing it again. They're doing that. They're trying to test how can they get out of this. Can they keep the cheap money flowing? Can they keep interest rates low without having to blow $85 billion a month or having to increase it? And the answer is clearly no. They know that, but they think they can kind of keep leaking out these little trial balloons, and hopefully people will say, oh, yeah, everything's fine. You don't have to print money anymore. Interest rates are just going to stay low because you say so. They're losing control of the bond market.
Absolutely. But, and the other thing is, within the Fed minutes, and they were floating out there that, that even if when they start to taper, when they start to pull back on some of the easing, that their long-term stance on the federal funds rate is going to stay at its current level of 0 for an extended period of time. Now, if the economy was actually getting better and the jobs were getting better, why wouldn't that rate change as well? Well, I can tell you why.
They know that it's not.
Yeah, I can tell you why.
How can they say they know for 2 years it's not going to be good, so they're going to keep it that way? How come
one side and not the other?
Yeah, no, but exactly. How come tapering is dependent on data, but leaving the rates there is not?
Well, I can tell you why. Because who's to stand to benefit from the federal fund rate? You know. I know.
Well, tell her
the banks. It's the banks. It's the people that have been benefiting all along. So if you keep the federal fund rate at or near 0, guess what? The government can't pay its debt back as it is. But if that rate were to start to go up, then they'd start to be in trouble. Okay, because they wouldn't be able to pay back their liabilities, and then all of a sudden banks would have to. It would be a little bit of a difference there for banks. Money wouldn't be quite as cheap as it is now. So, no, that can't happen. But guess what? We'll make mortgage rates worse for people because the economy is improving, and we'll keep this charade going on the other side. I mean, it's a complete and utter joke.
I just thought of an analogy. I don't know if you play Angry Birds. I'm sure millions of our listeners play Angry Birds. And you can get pretty good at Angry Birds without using all of the boost-up features. Okay? Right. But if you play Angry Birds and you just buy all the boost-up features, you could do really well. If you take those features away and you try to play the game without it, you can't. You just don't attain the same level of what you want, or the way you were playing without those boosted-up features. So they take the QE away. They can't maintain the low interest rates. They can't maintain the illusion of some kind of recovery. They can't keep interest rates low. They can't get this phony housing recovery, price appreciation to continue. They certainly can't keep the stock market at these levels. And now they're trying to say that keeping these rates low and having QE, and even if we don't have QE, we just keep interest rates low, that helps the job market. How?
Right.
It doesn't. So we are living in an entire farce economy, and it's becoming clearer and clearer, except I do have to say, Ryan, it even impacts me, and I think you're on track. You're immutable to this. You think they're just bluffing and they're never going to taper. I start to listen to them saying, yeah, they really do have to stop this. And they talk about stopping. I start to think, well, maybe they'll try to stop it. I think maybe they'll try. They'll get the clocks cleaned, and they'll reverse it. But I still think They have some credibility, a lot more. They have none with you. They have a modicum of a very small amount with me, and they get tremendous credibility with everybody else. So people are thinking, oh, maybe they're going to pull the trigger on the taper, and they'll just keep rates low. And so what's the worry?
The only way that they would ever gain credibility with me is for them to make a decision to actually do something, but they won't. They won't.
No, they'll have these talks back and forth. And
exactly. It's lip service. It's
this
exactly
Hamlet kind of dialogue with themselves.
Years. Yeah, for 5 years we've had lip service. We've had false economic reports. We have reports that are meaningless, reports that show us that our overall economy is improving when it's not.
It's a cover for them to do what they want to do, which is print money. And now that they don't want to print money, they realize, wait a minute, we don't have a way out of this. We have to print money.
Yeah, and the only way out of it, because they've already basically essentially started printing this money, is for them to start setting preconditions for these banks to have to lend it out to people. But they won't do that because guess what? Inflation would kick in. And
that's why you don't really have consumer price inflation to the levels of that money hasn't been unlocked.
And they know that. And it's basically, so if you just keep letting the big banks hoard the money, reinvest it, pump up the stock market, everybody feels happy-go-lucky that they don't really have to do anything. And then they'll just keep talking back and forth. It's a yo-yo. It's just a yo-yo effect. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And at the end of the day, what really is going to hurt at the end of the day is the U.S. dollar. And it's just a matter of time. Now, so many of you guys are out there like, okay, you guys are, this is all kind of doom and gloom, and I'm not trying to paint that type of picture. It's just kind of the objective view here of what's going on, and the long-term view is not very bright, okay? But how can you take advantage of this? I'm telling you guys today that whatever you can possibly do, try to get yourself. If you can buy an investment property, buy one. If you can buy a primary residence at these interest rates, then do it. Take full advantage if you're able to, because I promise you, when this stuff hits the fan at some point, we're not going to see interest rates nowhere near the levels that they're at today. Okay? Now, could this go on? Could this charade go on for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years? Well, I was convinced before that it couldn't happen, but at this point in time, I think that it can. Okay? I know that it's not happening on Obama's time. I've been quoted on the record saying that how many times, Louis? It's not happening while he's in office. So that's going to buy us at least another, almost 2 years, okay? But after
Ryan,
that,
you might want to rethink that. You may want to rethink that because Obama is now on the skids and he doesn't have the political capital, perhaps, to push his agenda where they may want his presidency to collapse because of an economic collapse.
Well, potentially, and let him take the fall for it, and along with Obamacare and everything else. Potentially.
Yep. I mean, they can just finally throw him under the bus and say, look, you're incompetent, you didn't know how to run a website, and you certainly don't know how to run an economy, and they go ahead and they give up the game and they stop at the QE, and they allow the economy to collapse. And they have some other plan for special drawing rights if there's dollar problems. Who knows?
But, Louis, let me ask you a question. Every time something like this comes up, what comes out of left field? Something else. Right?
Oh, of course. There's always an excuse to taper. There's always an excuse not to taper. But I think, Ryan, I'm getting to the point where I'm seeing – I don't think that they're saying that they want to taper QE because they think the economy is getting better. They are starting to say publicly, not just one or two of them, the hawks, they're all starting to say – this can't go on forever. They are nervous, and they do want to stop the QE. I think they want to stop the QE. They want to keep the easy money going. They're trying to figure out a way how to stop the QE, and they haven't figured it out yet. And
well, you know what? I can kind of tell you what I think what I think will happen. I think what they're going to have to do, and there's already been kind of a rumbling. I don't know if you heard about an investment firm that was willing to come in and buy like 10% of Fannie Mae. Okay, a private investment firm. So if they can somehow tie back into the private sector, into these banks, for them to start buying all the mortgage-backed securities instead of the Fed buying all the mortgage-backed securities and treasuries, then they can start to have an exit strategy as long as they have a buyer on the other side, right?
What's going to happen with the student loans? They're going to start monetizing those and they go bad?
It wouldn't surprise me.
Once they think they've got one bubble, one point of flood in the dike plugged, and that student loan thing is they're all in delinquent worse than they were worse than the housing subprime mortgages were.
Okay, so if you were looking at one key statistic and you wanted to know about jobs, what would be the key indicator? Student loans? Wouldn't that be one of the easiest things to look at? And how many people are defaulting on student loans? That would tell you.
Well, why are they defaulting is the first question. They don't have jobs,
because they don't
can't
have a
pay.
Job, or they don't have a stable job.
Or they have a part-time job, right.
When has the Fed ever said anything about that? When has the media said anything about that?
I've been talking about how the plight of the millennial, and I have an article coming out tomorrow, is really what's holding the economy back. And the reason the millennials are in such trouble is because QE puts them there because it doesn't help the job market. They can't save money. And so QE saving is discouraged. And because of QE, we don't have these huge failures where the pieces can be picked up and the assets can be then reallocated to people who may be able to do better with them. And oftentimes that could be a young entrepreneur, or if it's not a young entrepreneur, somebody else who picks up the pieces and then makes better decisions and can hire people to do better with the assets that have gone under. So when you liquidate malinvestment, those good things happen, the creative destruction concept. But when you have QE, all you do is you keep the established people, many of them losers, economic losers, in place. So then there's no way for the young people to get into those positions. There's no way for them to save. And then they've got student loan debt, and now they're being asked to pay for Obamacare so the older people, can have better health care. So QE has totally screwed the millennials out of any economic opportunity.
Yeah, I agree.
Where's their bailout? I mean, who's going to pay for and there will be a bailout. Or maybe there won't be. Maybe they'll say, just like they did with Lehman, we'd like to help Lehman, but we just don't have the tools. Because we've blown it all on QE.
The only thing that QE has done is allowed for these big banks to be able to pay out $13, $14 billion in
before
fines.
You get there, just to stay in business.
Yeah.
They've convinced us that those banks are essential to survival of the world, and without them, you just don't exist as a person, so we better keep them going. And, keeping them going doesn't just mean keeping them on life support. It means, keeping them on the lifestyle they're accustomed to, but the lifestyle they're accustomed to is it gets better every year. So they need more money.
Oh, what do you mean? You mean banks shouldn't? They don't have the ability, anybody, to just make money, just lending money out to people, and no, they actually have to invest in the real estate market to stay afloat now, and borrow money at next to nothing. Wow, imagine if we all had access to 0%, money. And
it's like having your own counterfeiting device, printing press.
Absolutely.
Make digital keystrokes, and everything is fine.
I mean,
fine for you.
If it was as simple as us just taking the monopoly money out, and we could buy as much of it as possible, we'd be in business. But,
the reason they're able to do it, Ryan, is because we have the world's Federal Reserve currency. There's really nothing close to it. All the currencies are flawed. And so when the United States decides to print up the difference to pay its banks to keep its government deficit spending going, the world just has to put up with it. Now, the world is trying to wean itself off the dollar, but that hasn't happened yet. And as long as the United States is given that ability, more dollars will be printed. And do you know that more dollars, physical dollars, are outside the United States than inside the United States? So we export a lot of our inflation. They need dollars.
Not surprising.
And that's why they can say, hey, what's the problem? Fed monetary policy, don't call it money printing, is not inflationary because, look, we don't have inflation. And then, of course, they manipulate those numbers too.
Yep. Yeah, and I want to kind of to segue, transition from here to another article that was in Bloomberg. So obviously we know what QE has kept a low interest rate environment, right? So we also have had a shortage of supply in at least a lot of the metropolitan areas throughout the country. There's an article on Bloomberg.
A shortage of what? Inventory, you mean?
Shortage of inventory throughout
of housing inventory. Okay.
Of housing inventory throughout the United States. And specifically in metropolitan areas, there's really been a big shortage of housing there, right? So there's an article that says that Americans recover home equity at record paces. And it went in and it was cited, I think that the source here was Zillow, and it showed that in the third quarter, about 10.8 million homeowners were underwater on their mortgages, down from 12.2 million in the second quarter. which basically that was a drop from 23.8% to 21% of the from the overall. Now, granted, you have to take these numbers somewhat with a grain of salt because it is based on Zillow's estimate, and who knows what actual numbers they're going off of, if they're going off of the Zillow's estimate, which is basically what their proposed is, because a lot of times that can either be under or over the amount. So let's just still say we're hanging in there at about 1 in 4 underwater, right? Let's just assume that these
between
numbers
1 in 4 and 1 in 5, right?
Exactly. So 1 in 4, 1 in 5. But I went in and dove further.
Which, by the way, Ryan, that's enormous.
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's right up there still with where we're headed with student loans and everything else.
Yeah, and the reason they want to get them higher is to pay back, to bail out those people who bought the homes, which is another thing that millennials get screwed on, is because if those houses stay low, maybe they have a shot at buying them, even if they don't have a job and they're not able to save money. But if you can't save money, don't have a job, and prices are too high, you're priced out of the market. And yet the policy is to try to get these home prices higher.
Absolutely. So, this article went in to basically say that, hey, now that we've gotten people having more equity in their houses, they're going to be selling soon, so that should solve the problem of a shortage of inventory. But what the article didn't address is that a lot of the reason that a lot of these metropolitan areas do have a shortage of inventory is because of the amount of cash buyers and investors and institutional buyers that have been buying a lot of real estate over the last year, right, or 2 or 3 or 4.
Right.
So it's not like we have – I mean, I think it's BlackRock owns about 40,000 properties on their own, that hedge fund, right? 40,000 properties.
American Homes for Rent owns 20 plus. There's a few others that own in the tens of thousands too. So there's about 200,000 homes probably in relatively large institutional investors' hands.
Right. So now we've got, essentially,
which is a drop in the bucket of the overall housing, but it's concentrated in certain metro areas.
Yeah, but now if we break these stats down again and we say, okay, well, let's say 25% of the people are still underwater, they can't sell their house, right? And then we say, let's say 25 or 30% of all transactions that are taking place today are cash buyers for investors. So now we've eaten up almost like 50% of the market.
Right.
So let's say that there's 50% of the market that are actually just regular sales. Okay. Well, that's not a normal market. A normal market is when a much smaller subset is an
10%.
investor. Yeah, is an investor institutional buying. We would have a much smaller number of people that are underwater. We wouldn't have these ridiculous, year-over-year increases in home equity. This same article, Lewis, they basically said that there was a 10+% in 2013. She called for like an 8.6 return for 2014.
No.
If that happens, if you get a 10-point spread one year and an 8% spread the next year, the only way that could actually happen is if interest rates were to come back down. And
the investors were willing to pay those prices because the average mom and pop, who makes up the rest of the market, can't afford increases in prices of homes when either don't have jobs or their wage increases are not increasing anywhere near that. So it doesn't matter how low interest rates are. At some point, people can't pay.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, I just, I think that once again, everybody's thinking, okay, great, we're on board. The Fed basically says, hey, we're going to taper here in the future. So that now means, hey, I got to jump into the housing market because it looks like interest rates are going up. And this is actually a daily discussion that I've had with many of my clients over the last couple of weeks. Is they're like, well, hey, did you hear what the Fed said? And I said, well, hey, have you been listening to my podcast lately? Because I've been talking about this for years at this point.
Which is a great service that you're providing, Ryan, because they can actually, they don't have to believe everything we're saying, but we're giving them far more information from which to make a decision on what they might do.
Well, and Lewis, we're telling them whether they like what I'm giving them, whether they like what I'm saying, it doesn't really matter. But you know what? I'm at least breaking down what the media is putting out there and at least giving them the other perspective, whether they want to believe it or not, right? And nobody out there really, whether real estate agents, mortgage professionals, it's always a rah thing, like, buy now, buy now, buy now.
The housing prices going up are somehow a good thing. And for the only person the rising house price is good for is an investor who bought low or somebody who's already got a house. But if you're trying to buy a house, that isn't a good thing.
Yeah, and how many people out there are actually in a situation where that's what they're doing is buying and flipping houses? I mean, I'm doing that, right? And see, this is the other thing. I look at things from the perspective of, look, I have a real estate license here, right? I manage a mortgage company. I do buy and flip houses. So, you know what? I'm not just saying this stuff. I'm actually living and breathing this stuff.
Right.
You know what I mean? I see how it affects things. And when I'm constantly watching the market, and I'm even watching now where investors are bidding properties up to, I'm looking at the stock market, all the signs that I'm getting just don't seem right to me right now. And it's kind of scary because, with the ebbs and flows of these interest rates, I mean, things could really take a turn for the worse in the drop of a dime. I mean, it really.
Well, Ryan, also, what if these 25% or 20% underwater homeowners get back up to parity? Well, you know what happens, and I wrote a blog post on this called, I think it's Real Estate's Underwater Downside Sticky Catch-22. Well, then they come on the market. Well, now you have more inventory, but that depresses the price. So the minute they think they're going to get their price, everybody else thinks they're going to get their price. They flood the market with inventory, and the price goes back down. There's a limit to how far you can push home prices just because there's an affordability factor and there is financing that's involved. That's not true with the stock market. Stock markets are never unaffordable. They can go up to higher and higher rates. So I'm predicting that the stock market will continue it going up, but the housing prices will start to kind of level off. And then when the stock market crashes in areas that you have high home prices, luxury home areas, those will get hit more than the low-priced areas like we had in the last housing bubble. So places like San Francisco, New York, that have seen big price increases because they're the main recipients of Silicon Valley and stock options and stock appreciation. When the stock market goes down, those areas will get hit harder. Last time it was Las Vegas, Phoenix, places where average homes went up really high. And they'll get hit too because investors, if they're not seeing a return in Phoenix or Las Vegas, and they've got 6,000-7,000 homes there, they know how to dump and write it off. Yeah. They'll sell, they'll sell at lower prices.
Well, the thing that I'm saying too, Louis, that's kind of scary, right, is that we are a consumption-based and in debt economy. So
70% of the GDP, which there's nothing produced, but is buying stuff. That's right. It's consumer
absolutely.
spending.
So the thing that scares me is that, I hear what you're saying, where not as many people are going to buy at these higher price levels. However, I do see a lot of people already starting to stretch to say, you know what? Hey, look, we can have that move-up home. We've got this equity in our house. Hey, look at what
and you find a product for them to buy it? They'll do it. You're absolutely right.
You know what they're doing? They're looking and seeing their stock portfolio, their retirement accounts, everything's going up, so they're feeling all good about themselves.
Not just that, Brian. People are taking money out of their 401ks and buying houses. Not to roll them over into other 401k approved investment properties, but really just to buy a primary residence.
Well, and see, that's more of my point. That's why I think that there is still room for some more price appreciation as long as interest rates stay low, because guess what?
As long as the stock market stays high.
As long as the stock market stays high, which undoubtedly it pretty much has to at this point. Because
where else are you going to put your money?
Well, where else are you going to put your money? So people are getting these great returns right now. So if they go to get that mortgage and let's say this year it was $550,000 and next year it's $600,000, it could be the difference of them just going and borrowing an extra $20,000, $30,000 out of their retirement account or whatever stock brokerage account that they have to be able to stretch to make that work. Because why? Because they have a good feeling about where the economy is going, right?
Yeah, but that's still a relative. That's not. I mean, there's a large number of people in this situation, but not that many people have that much money in their 401ks to prop up the nationwide market. That may be true in the Washington, D.C. metro area for sure.
Well, and when I do talk about things, guys, you will hear me talk more about my area, which is the D.C. metropolitan area. So obviously this will probably translate to other major metropolitan areas. But
correct.
D.C. is a little bit different than a lot because we've got essentially, actually just in Northern Virginia, we have, I believe it's four.
Well, I think it's 7 out of 10 of the richest counties in America.
Yeah, I mean it's unbelievable, and that's a byproduct mainly of the job situation. I mean, there's more.
Which is a byproduct of the government spending.
Yep, and that's
DC Metro has to be in favor of QE because QE funds government surplus spending, which allows the government to continue to spend money on government projects and never to cut back on government workers and continue to give them cost of living increases.
Well, that's why we've had, to me, in the D.C. metro area, we've had such huge jumps in home equity in the last year or two. Is because of that. I mean, and
private sector's cutting back on jobs. State public sectors are cutting back on jobs and benefits. The federal government, not at all.
Well, and
look at all the jobs that were created around Obamacare. They're pulling people off
right.
the street to make them navigators, not even checking their criminal records. I mean, there's plenty of jobs to be had in the federal government, not in the state and not in the private sector.
You know, and those are often considered as the
$600 million to build a website. You know how many people work in there? They probably weren't working in D.C., but that's the scope, just to give you an example of government projects. There's a lot of money sloshing around without much accountability.
It's the standard, you know, huge waste factor when it comes to stuff like that.
$600 million. And did you hear the president? He was bemoaning the fact that, yes, government procurement is not very good at the federal level. Well, of course it's not. It's federal government. He didn't even realize he was making the point that most people who are for smaller government were making. He's saying, look, we want to do great things. We want to do Obamacare, but it's hard for us because we're the federal government and we don't know how to do this kind of stuff. Well, yeah, that's why private enterprise does a better job.
Yeah, that's why you should get out of it.
Oh, I don't know. They're saying the website's not even going to be finished by the end of the month. Sibelius was giving a demonstration the other day, and, of course, the website went down, which is kind of funny.
Right.
And I said, this happens all the time. Well, that's comforting. But then she said, well, that's November 30th. That's not really a hard stop date. Oh, yes, it is. That's what they said. They have it fixed. They're working 24/7. This is a disaster. They're going to have to pull this thing back. I don't know what they're going to do, Ryan. What do you think?
I don't either.
I mean, this is even more obvious. The difference between the dilemma of healthcare.gov and the Fed's QE program is people understand that the website doesn't work, and they understand losing their insurance, and they understand when somebody says you're not going to lose your insurance and that the website's going to work, that they can say, wait a minute, that's not true. At least people can see that Obamacare doesn't work. It's hard for people to see that QE doesn't work. They don't even know what it is.
Yeah, and I'm interested to see how that all plays out. I think that they're not going to have a choice but to change up the delaying of all this. But
what happens in January when they have the budget debates? Do you think they're going to be mocking when the Republicans are trying to shut the government down over Obamacare? People are going to be cheering them on if they don't have this thing fixed then.
And remember, we said back when that that this should have been the main thing that the Republican was championing was that this does not work. Just look at the website. Just look at the website. You know what I mean? And instead,
well, now they will. I mean, now the media will make that point for them because the media has turned on. It's kind of strange. You do see, and that's why I suggest that there's something afoot where maybe Obama's kind of on the outs because we're not seeing the same defense and ignoring of his blunders. Yeah. And you can see the way he behaves. He's contrite. He looks beleaguered, and there's no two ways about it. And it doesn't seem like there's any plan to rescue him. And you had those 30-some-odd Democrats vote against him to kind of make some adjustments with the Republicans on the Obamacare. So that's going to be, I think that's going to be the story of 2014 is, and this could provide the cover that the Fed needs, is that this thing becomes a disaster. And, if people start dying because they can't arrange their coverages,
right.
That's a very big deal.
Yeah.
You had the Bush-lied, people died. Well, they're going to start with the same I don't say it's nonsense. They're going to start with the same type of sloganeering with Obamacare.
Now, you know what will happen? The Fed will step in. It'll be this will be labeled QE Infinity, and they'll basically just pay for everybody's medical care as well.
Well, sure. They won't call it QE. They'll call it something else. They'll say that, someone has to act. The federal government can't act because they'll blame. You see when the Fed has already set up a defense, they say that what's holding the economy back now is not the Fed and its QE policies or not the Fed and stopping QE. It's the dysfunctional fiscal policies of Congress. Like it's Congress's fault. Now, if the economy doesn't work, because the Fed's done as much as they could, look how much money we spent, not realizing that that's not helping the economy. But if the Obamacare thing becomes a fiasco and there really is a lot of economic and personal pain as a result next year, you're right. They can say, look, Congress doesn't know what they're doing. President doesn't know what he's doing. But here we are, and they'll come up with some type of program to print money to fix it.
So are you thinking that when we have all these budget talks and basically the second installment of the government shutdown comes, that the Republicans are not going to have the Democrats aren't going to have a choice but to side with the Republicans and avoid another shutdown, obviously, and give them what they want? Is that what you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I think if you look at it, the dynamic will be completely changed. The perception that was played out was that the Republicans were being sore losers, the law of the land, Obamacare passed. Somehow Republicans, which is not true, were forced to fund it, but they were being babies and they weren't going to fund it. And they were threatening to shut the government down. And look at the pain that caused. The Lincoln Memorial was shut. The Washington Monument was shut. What a horror show the Republicans caused. Well, now people are starting to see, whether you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Obamacare is causing a lot more trouble than your trip to Yosemite State Park, Yosemite National Park. And the Republicans will be able to kind of dig their heels in and say, no, look, this is what happens when you just allow the federal government to have money to spend with no accountability. We have to shut this down because even when you give them the money to spend it, we didn't defund Obamacare. Look what they did. They screwed it up.
Right.
So we have to start cutting spending. Some of the Democrats, other than the real ideologues, are going to say, my constituencies will probably see things that way. They may not like Republicans. They may not like what they stand for, but they're right here, I think. And they did show that, 67, 70% of independents are now opposed to Obamacare.
Yep.
95% of Republicans are. 70-some-odd%, but that's down from 90% of Democrats are still in favor of Obamacare. And that's only because, the Republicans and the Democrats hold their party lines. It's really, you have to look at the independent, and they make up the largest percentage of the voting population. They're 2/3 against.
Yeah.
And which means they see a flaw in excessive government programs and excessive government spending. So they're not going to be sympathetic towards, let's keep our parks open, don't let the Republicans throw a hissy fit over this meaningless fight over Obamacare. This starts to become a real issue.
Well, you see, like I said, I don't know what's coming down the path, but I feel like that there is one more sideshow that's going to take place between now and then, probably. To
keep the can kicking going on QE?
Yeah, and I don't know what it is, but I know we have to have a good distraction. It's funny because that whole thing about the census and then making up the employment number, that story's almost got buried already, okay?
Just like when the Fed official said, I'm sorry, the QE didn't work and we blew all that money, that got buried too.
That got buried. So, I feel like,
Obamacare can't get buried.
That can't get buried, and that's going to be pretty much the talks for the next couple months. That's what they're going to be talking about.
Oh, when November 30th comes after Thanksgiving, that website isn't fixed. They even said that the payment processing doesn't work. And now Obama's saying, we're going to let people just go to the insurance company and buy insurance. Well, they could have done that in the first place.
They could have done that in the first place. And you know what the insurance companies have already done? They've already set up their systems to have to implement Obamacare. Right?
Well, there was one company, I think it was WellPoint, Blue Cross, one of the two. They ran articles saying, there's other ways of buying health insurance that work. I'm just mocking that. They're supposed to be partners in this whole thing. They're coming right out and saying, it's so bad. It's not, when you have Jay Leno and Jon Stewart and all these, making it a butt of jokes, it's very hard to be an ideologue and say, it's a good thing, pre-existing condition. They could have covered anything, any reason people like Obamacare could have been handled without building a website, collecting personal information, and a 2,200-page law that no one read.
Yeah, well, when you have George Bush laughing at Jay Leno's joke, which was a direct jab at Obamacare and Obama, it's gotten to an all-time low. You know what I mean?
Sure, because
it really has.
Bush was a lame duck right after Katrina for the next 3 years, and that's what's going to happen to Obama. But the difference is, I think Bush didn't try to push any agenda. When did he do Medicare D? Do you remember? Did he do? I think he did it earlier. I think he did it before he got reelected, right?
I think he did. Yeah, I think he did it before.
Yeah, I think Bush just basically realized, okay, well, they don't like me anymore, and 9/11 doesn't, and he just didn't do anything. And it'll be interesting to see whether Obama tries to push some of his agenda, where he doesn't have the political capital right now, and he hasn't done anything to regain that. What he's going to do?
Yeah, he's lost all the leverage, that's for sure. It'll be interesting to see what takes place over the next couple of weeks. But we're coming up on the end of the show. But before we get to the end of the show, I did want to give you this week's credit tip of the week. We try to bring these to you each and every week. This is brought to you by the Credit Pros, who I recommend to use for credit repair, legal credit repair. So as we know that, the winter has been fast approaching, and home buyers have been trying to beat the winter freeze. They've been trying to get out there and snatch up homes, and a lot of people have, it may be you out there, that have what's known as a thin credit file, or basically you have no credit at all. You might get that when you pull your credit, it shows up as NA, not applicable, and you don't even have a credit score. Well, one of the things that the Credit Pros recommend, it's an extremely effective way, and it adds a positive credit on your credit report, is to have, you or whoever else is going on a loan get added on as an authorized user to maybe a loved one's card. So let's just say, Lewis, when your son gets old enough, you can add him on as an authorized user to 1 or 2 or 3 of your credit cards or whatever it may be. And guess what happens? That next month when it gets re-reported, he gets all your past history showing up on his credit report as if it's his. Okay?
Which, assuming yours is good, then that's a good thing.
Assuming yours is good, which is why the Credit Pros say make sure that it's a loved one's card that hopefully is financially responsible, right? You don't just go out and just add somebody on to somebody that's not financially responsible if they're not keeping their balances to like 30% of their high credit limits, or they're paying late and not on time, right? Well, let's just say, Lewis, that your credit profile is like 800 credit scores. You're keeping your proportions of balances to high credit limits in the range that they're supposed to. You pay your bills on time, and you want your son to be set up for success. So when he gets out of school or whatever he chooses to do, he's got a decent credit profile. That's the way to do it.
And can you go through for our listeners how you actually set that up? Is it just
all you have to do is a simple call to your credit company. You say, hey, I'd like to add my son, daughter, whoever it may be, to my card as an authorized user. They'll basically get their information, their social and everything. They'll send out a card. Now, here's the best part. Like, let's say you don't want that person to be able to use the card. You can still set him up as an authorized user. You don't ever have to give him the card.
Wow.
So,
because they don't know who made the purchases. They just see the activity on the card, on the purchases and the payments, correct?
Well, actually, there would be, it's on the same account, but there would be 2 different accounts, almost like a sub-account. You know what I mean? So my dad actually did this for me when I was in college. Like, he had an American Express card that he added me as an authorized user. He gave me my card, and I used it. I was allowed to use $100 a month, and it would show up on his account statement for the charges that I had, right?
Oh, so they do bifurcate them.
Exactly, but he didn't have to give me the card. And my thing is, if you're worried about that person spending money on that card, don't even give them the card. But you can give them access to a clean credit profile if you have one.
So even if there's no activity by your son on a bifurcated account, they will still give him the benefit of your good payment record?
Absolutely.
That's a great tip.
Great tip, and that's a way to, not only get a credit profile, but to enhance a credit profile. So keep that in mind, guys. And, if you're in a situation that you need to talk to somebody, I'd be glad to link you up with the Credit Pros. So, they can break it down in great detail and make sure you're set up properly. Lewis, great show again today. I want to thank you for coming on.
Thanks, Ryan.
If anybody wants to check out what Lewis's latest blog, I think you're coming out with a post tomorrow, you said?
Yeah, on the millennials in QE.
Okay, well, you guys can go to smoggled.com. That's SMAULGLD.com. Lewis, I appreciate your time as always.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, guys. We'll be back again next week. If you have any questions in the meantime, check us out at realestate360live.com. Take care.